All right. Well, my arbitrary number in my head that I was sitting as like the minimum threshold has been passed. So it is time to get started. And welcome everyone to this Place Your AI webinar, Shopping Center Myths and Facts 2022. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this is probably the most fun webinar of the year. We do a lot of good ones, but this for me is like one of the highlights. And what we're going to essentially do is have a quick introduction for those of you who are unfamiliar with Placer, tell you kind of what the data, at least that informs my perspective. And then we are going to dive into a series of different topics, and we are going to ask whether they are myth or fact. And then we will obviously, as always, take questions. If you have a question at any point throughout the course of the conversation, please send it in using the Q&A feature at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have Zoom configured. My guest today. So last year we did this webinar and it was amazing. And we were thrilled to be joined by David Spahn, Vice President of Research at the Brixmor Property Group, and Alana Loeffler, Managing Director, Business Strategy of Americas at Cushman & Wakefield. And we have managed to get both of them back this year. I think this is the earliest I scheduled a webinar ever to make sure we could have both of you back. David, Alana, thank you both for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Happy to be here, Ethan.
Very excited about this. But just before we dive into the content itself, let us talk just a second about what is the data that you're going to be seeing in the background today. Placer is a location data company. What that means very simply, people vote with their feet. We show you how they vote across the United States every single day to retail locations across the country. We do that by observing a panel of over 30 million devices. We then utilize AI and machine learning algorithms to make estimations based off that panel on visits to retail locations. Very critically, this is all anonymized aggregate data. So we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. And we then present that data in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from visit counts, true trade areas, market share, store benchmarks, cannibalization, and a whole lot more. If anyone is interested, we have a free version of our premium product available at placer.ai. We also have a home of our free tools in a section called The Square at placer.ai-square. But now it is time to talk myths, facts. And let us start with one that is going to be very top of mind, at least for the next few weeks until we have proof one way or the other. And David, I will start with you. Myth or fact, retail visits on Black Friday will outpace 2021 and come within striking distance of 2019.
Well, I think it's entirely possible. I mean, for our company, we exceeded 2019 last year, so we're very excited. So I definitely see that could happen again. I might argue that I wouldn't necessarily say at least last year, a strong October was no harbinger of a strong November. But I would say, I think given all of the bad economic news, if anyone really wanted a deal, now is the time that they're going to get their what's into the stores to find one. And I think that's really going to probably be the bigger story altogether. It's less about the joy of shopping and more about the need for something in particular, the need for a deal.
For a deal, yeah. I mean, that's a really great point. Alana, same question to you. Myth or fact, Black Friday in 2021 will Black Friday in 22 will outpace 21 and come close to 2019.
Yeah, I kind of agree with David on this. I'd say it's a fact. We have a longer shopping season than usual this holiday. Consumer sentiment has not been great. They're pessimistic about inflation, the economy, so they're going to be looking for a sale or a bargain. What's that phrase? The more you spend, the more you save. So a phrase near and dear to my heart. So I think they're going to be coming out this Black Friday. Retail sales have been relatively flat right now compared to last year. But unemployment is still at near record lows. Consumers have more in their bank accounts than pre-pandemic. So I think, it's cause to be positive for Black Friday and the holiday shopping season.
Yeah, I think you're both right. I think the other piece here is look at the messaging from the retailers. Last year, we heard very aggressive messaging from so many retailers. Shop in October, do not wait for Black Friday. There were having issues with supply chain, worries about COVID, issues with labor shortages. We are not hearing that right now, which tends to make me believe that retailers also have high expectations for what they're going to see this season as well. Retail diversification. This is a topic that we have been fascinated by for quite a while. Alana, I'll start with you here. myth or fact, non-traditional retail tenants will play an even bigger role in shopping center performance, and shopping center owners will increasingly emphasize a more diverse tenant mix in 2023.
I think it is an absolute fact. You know, we're seeing more and more landlords look at non-traditional tenants to drive more foot traffic, whether that's digitally native brands, emerging local artisans, medtail users. We're seeing a lot of growth there between urgent care centers, medical spas, veterinary services. Then there's, you know, other users like art galleries, childhood education centers, and daycare. So much happening in experiential and entertainment, fitness. So I think, you know, these types of tenants not only drive more foot traffic, but they improve the cross shopping opportunities among other retailers in the centers. They increase dwell times for consumers. And yeah, I think it all lends towards more the health of the center.
Yeah, absolutely. David, your thoughts?
I think it's definitely a fact. I would also make the argument that I think better landlords, and I don't just mean, you know, like fancy landlords, have been doing this for a while. I mean, I think they've seen the need to make the experience more unique to the property itself, and to really cater, as we like to say here at Brixmor, to be the center of the community that we serve. And we want to respond to what the trade area wants, what the customer wants, and we're not going to sort of get out there and just do a deal because that's what, you know, financially makes sense. Some of that, of course, does happen, but I would also really sort of point out, like, you know, in bringing in these different tenants, you know, there's still not been any substantial new construction in the shopping center industry. And I think we're going on 12 years. At that point, there's sort of there's a finite amount of space for all these new tenants. And so you're able to really push unique tenants if you want to bring somebody in. But that being said, if you're one of the tenants, you really have to fight a little bit harder to get that space and to make yourself sort of, you know, find yourself out there in front of the consumer.
I mean, that's a really fantastic point. I think to your point that this has been happening for a while, I think it's absolutely true. I think one of the things that always surprises me, at least, is how unaware so many people who are looking at this sector, you know, or that is their responsibility, who are unaware that this trend has been happening. And I think you're seeing decisions made, I mean, 10 years ago, even more in some cases, really pay off now. And I think sometimes we don't give this sector the credit it deserves for its forward thinking. I think it's just because of the nature of brick and mortar, it takes longer to see the results of smart decisions. But these are not decisions that were made yesterday by any stretch.
Yeah.
I think it's a really important point. One question that came in about recording. Yes, all of our webinars are available usually the next day, start of day Eastern Standard Time, at the same link that you signed up at. So if anyone is having trouble finding that, please email me. I'm at ethan@placer.ai, but it's available there the next morning. The next question, actually, I mean, Dave, I'll start with you here because this is kind of following on with what you said. This is one of my favorite topics, and we call it the mall waterfall effect. But as malls look into having these more diverse tenant mixes, and there are a larger number of tenants looking for spaces, and there's not a lot of new construction, there will be a significant waterfall effect where non-top tier malls see a boost in performance and occupancy as there's more competition within those top tier malls. David, myth or fact?
I'm going to say this is a myth. I have not seen this. I'm going to be the contrarian for this answer. I think one of the issues that has come up is that with all of the attention to foot traffic, those top dominant, whatever we want to call them, top tier dominant A malls benefit. I mean, I'm particularly talking really specifically within the mall world because they have the traffic and they can bring in the tenant who wants to feed off of that. Because a lot of these tenants, if they're special, if they're new, don't have a built-in following and don't necessarily want to be the driver of the traffic itself at first. I mean, they want to be able to come into a sort of a safe environment and have traffic come to them and see them. And so I think it's, without specialization within some of these secondary or non-tier, or whatever we're going to call them, centers, it's going to be really hard for them to capture that. And especially because the data has become so transparent that everybody sort of knows where the hot traffic is. And that's what they want to do. They're all chasing the same centers. So eventually, if it's a numbers game, yes, they'll look somewhere else, but if it's just based on the appeal, so I'm not really seeing a large waterfall effect.
Alana, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would have to agree with David as well, but I also have to say that I love how you've branded this concept, the waterfall effect. It's so memorable. So if it happens, I'm definitely going to come back to you and remember you. But I think, retailers know what co-tenancy they want to be among. They've done their homework. They've looked at a lot of data. They can see the centers that command higher foot traffic, to David's point. And even more importantly, they know who their customer is, where they live, where they shop, and they want to be where they are. So I think, you might see an effect where retailers look towards adjacent available retail or locations in certain submarkets or destinations where shopping traffic is particularly strong. And that might happen to be near those top tier malls, but I don't think we'll necessarily see a push towards the other centers.
Amazing. And one, by the way, a question that came in about this regarding, I like this term, fancy landlords. Have you seen year-over-year change in the effective trade areas for A plus malls versus B and C malls? I can tell you in the little research we've done on the topic, the answer is absolutely yes, that when we look at those top tier malls, they've absolutely gotten stronger, and their reach has expanded. And I don't know if this is something similar to what David and Alana, what you've seen.
I would say it's some of, we of course play in the open air world, so we're usually adjacent. So we have seen, trade areas do grow when we bring in tenants that, that are unique or well-known traffic drivers for sure. But we haven't, by and large, without being in the retail world, I would actually probably argue that it's perhaps more of a waterfall effect for a node as opposed to a center itself. I think it's really about, an area becoming a dominant area. Yes, it's usually given by one center, but that only increases the value to the people who own the apartment.
Yeah, and that's a very important point. And also, I think it's really good because this sets it up for like how smart I'm going to look next year, which is really important as well. All right, next topic. Grocery continues to lead the way. Alana, I'll start with you here. The wider grocery sector will continue to lead the way and enjoy its COVID-driven boost.
Yeah, I think that's a fact. I think there's a caveat that inflation is certainly changing shopping behaviors in the grocery sector. We're seeing a definitive flight to value. So stores like Costco and BJ's are benefiting from that trend right now. And we're seeing, shifts in shopping patterns and goods being purchased. But I think, we're going to hold steady in terms of visitation to grocery.
Yeah. David, your thoughts on this?
I sort of a mixed bag. I sort of do feel like the call out needs to be made that bigger is better at some level when it comes to a grocery world because of the, when we saw the push into one-stop shopping over COVID. But really sort of the larger the store, the longer the sort of the dwell time is sort of one of the ways to think about it. But what I would also argue is, when COVID hit, we were at sort of an all-time low in terms of the share of the food dollar that grocery stores were sucking up. And I have a really hard time thinking like that the COVID shift to grocery stores is going to be meaningful really beyond 2 to 3 more years, because I just feel like that's a habit that was built up along it was over 2 decades that the increase of the share of the food dollar outside of the house to restaurants, and it just feels like that's gonna, like, it's hard not to imagine the pendulum sort of not readjusting at some level. It may not go all the way back, but it's sort of.
That was actually gonna be my question. Do you think it's like, because as opposed to some of the other shifts where it's availability and okay, we had like home improvement, we obviously did incredibly well early on in the pandemic. There was time now, but it's not like once you build, I don't know, a swing set, you're like, well, I got to go build 18 more swing sets because I love this now. But once you make cooking part of like your life, there is this element of, will it go back to, will it be at the same extreme? No, but it won't swing all the way back. So it does feel like it lands in this middle ground as opposed to some of the other trends.
I think for sure. But I do just have to think that like was a long-term trend of going out to restaurants. it feels like it's hard once the option is available again. You
Mhm.
know, would you not do it? I mean, I know certainly I do it. I mean, I wasn't, you know, for the first 6 months of the pandemic, I didn't set foot in a restaurant, you know, but now, like, you know, I don't go out as much. But I think it's frankly like there's, you know, other travel comes up or, you know, something else happens and it's just less of a chance. But I would probably say our dollars have shifted back much more closely to where they used to be.
Interesting. Okay. And this is one that I'm actually very curious because I have no idea. This is one that really baffles me. It's the office recovery. I mean, Alana, let's start with you. We have found the new normal, and again, I apologize for using that terminology. I know it's the worst, but I can't think of anything better. We have found the new normal for office visits, and they will remain at current levels.
Yeah, the new normal is such a normal phrase now. But yeah, I think that's a myth. We're continuing to see a rise in employees coming back into the workplace on an average work week. Maybe it's, you know, not Monday through Friday like it used to be. It's definitely shifted in terms of what that looks like. And we've seen, you know, the number of employees who are purely remote continues to change. And, you know, we're definitely looking at a hybrid model going forward. But I think, you know, I think we're going to continue to see shifts back to office next year. You know, we're starting to see even in New York, the numbers just from April to September changed drastically. So I think we're going to see a positive change next year.
David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, I would even make the argument, and Alana, I don't know what your experience has been in New York, but like I've noticed a difference between like, so when we came back to sort of our regular hybrid, so it feels odd to say that, in September when all the kids come back to school in the city, you know, you expected it to be sort of crazy on the trains and it wasn't. I would actually say like it has been much busier in the last 2 weeks in Midtown Manhattan than it had been even in September. And I think more people are coming in. Yes, there is always a certain amount of tourism there for sure. And, you know, most of the time you can figure out who they are. But I would argue that I think I agree with Alana that I think it's a myth. And I think we'll continue to see improvements. You know, whether it's ever back where it was remains to be seen. But I think it's definitely going to improve as I think more people are coming in. But it will be highly contingent upon, you know, scheduling, and it will never be the 5 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, but I mean, you bring up a really interesting point that it hasn't gone the way we expected. So there was this wide feeling of, all right, we'll see, August will be what it'll be, and then September post Labor Day will have this kind of really strong bounce back. We didn't see it in September, and we didn't see it in October. And so I guess my question is, why? Like, what is the? I said journalists from like, what is the driver of the return to the office? What are kind of what's that core aspect from your perspective?
I mean, I think it's really about the experience as someone who works predominantly from home these days and goes into the office, you know, a few times a week in a month. It's definitely the experience. And I think retail plays a huge part in that. It's, you know, the interaction with your colleagues, getting that exposure to upper management. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And you're looking at a full day, you know, if you're going to take the time to commute in, if you're going to take the time to go through those motions that you don't necessarily, and especially with inflation being what it is now, and you know, spending on gas or, you know, public transportation, I think it counts even more to have that experience and what you want that to look like. So I think retail definitely has a really unique opportunity going forward to really help craft and create what that experience looks like for employees.
That's a really important point. David, I'm going to put you on the spot because Alana jumped to that first one. A question came in, and I have done no research on this, so I have nothing to back it up. But are suburban office visits coming back at the same rate as city offices, or do you think there's been a difference between them?
I don't know. I haven't done any research into it. I would have to assume, and I've actually sort of thought this, I think it was over like the spring and the summer, is that what I really wonder is there a difference between what you might call gateway office markets versus non? where there's maybe a less defined, maybe like there's less integration of non-office uses in the downtown. And I really wonder if those are places that have seen even more significant drop-offs, because it feels like there's less of a reason to go to like a secondary office market. You know, like you can sort of make the justification for New York or Chicago, maybe not San Francisco, but I wonder if that carries through to suburban office parks, because if there's just not really the same sort of energy level that you get from going into an office there, will you see that, you know, similarly in a secondary market?
Yeah, that's super interesting. The idea of like office placemaking, I think, is absolutely fascinating, and I think it's one of the kind of the big topics to track, because it's the upside there is kind of a really cool revival of what the office experience is like. Looking a little bit at migration, and Alana, we'll start with you here. Major cities will see a significant comeback in 2023, including those that were particularly affected by COVID migration patterns. Myth or fact?
I sure hope it's a fact, because I would love nothing more than to see these major cities impacted by migration, you know, continue that revival trend that they're on. We're starting to see a little bit of a pullback in multifamily, particularly in some of the areas that have had an influx of new residents during COVID. So that could be an indication that things are starting to level off and shift back towards a focus towards urban. So there's a lot in the way of revitalization of like more localized enclaves, more submarkets starting to take shape and change. There's so much has happened with Soho and Meatpacking District in New York that has changed over the last few years and really hyper focused on the needs of the community. So I think we could really start to see a major shift in transformation in even the makeup of the real estate in these urban settings.
Interesting. David, your thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways to sort of think about it. I mean, I agree with Alana. I sure hope it's a fact that, you know, the larger markets are seeing some benefit of increased return. And I think it's an important point to, you know, as she mentioned about, you know, focusing in on submarkets and really catering to the needs of the specific populations. One of the benefits that most of those markets that we're looking at have is that they're much more integrated. People have a tendency to think it's all office or it's all residential or it's all whatever other use you want to call it. But I mean, there are people who live like throughout Manhattan who live, you know, in areas where you would just assume it's only office. And there's plenty of residential buildings that are, you know, within a block or two of a major office. So I think from that angle, there's enough of a population base across so much of the cities. And it's not just even, yes, it is also San Francisco and Chicago in those cases. So I think from that angle, you know, like you are seeing that, and that it was always there. It just sort of got hidden under, you know, the fact that the office population wasn't coming back yet.
I mean, that is very interesting. I also do think that it does feel like on all sides it's starting to level off. When you look at that year-over-year data, places that we're seeing much larger migration patterns, it started to kind of come back down to what it was pre-pandemic. And, you know, obviously those who had been hit much harder, it's starting to come back as well. I think the question is, for me, it's like there's some cities that they just have an obvious, clear staying power. Like New York, there's really only one New York, and that's it. I always wonder for things like San Francisco, where there was this kind of, at least a very good argument to be made that there's a bubble, like it doesn't really make perfect sense. Is the comeback to what it was pre-pandemic, or is the comeback to some probably healthier middle level in between? And I think only time will tell. Moving on to the next topic. David, we'll start with you here, because if we're going to talk about luxury and you are rocking that amazing orange coat, that is the only place to start. In the face of, I feel like we should have all worn one. I mean, that was the real mess.
Definitely. I wish I got that memo.
2023, that'll be the uniform. In the face of continued inflation, luxury will continue its run of dominance. David, myth or fact?
I'm going to caveat and say, like, so aside, not in my professional life for sure, do I have a lot of knowledge of the luxury market under any sort of previous employment that I can think of. But I really think it's a story of income bifurcation, and will that upper, whatever we're going to call it, quartile, quintile, I can't think of the sixth breakout, how they continue to spend will really drive what's going to happen. I think the shift in traffic is, I have to wonder if it's really a downshift of aspirational buyers out of the market, because you're not seeing like mass changes in luxury rollout either. They're continuing to open and build bigger stores and add to the fleet and open up new channels. Like, I just can't imagine that they see that, they don't see headwinds like this might portend, if you will. But I do think my guess is it has to be some level of the folks who might want that one Gucci bag or a pair of shoes or what have you, and have decided that they're just going to trade down and shop somewhere else.
Alon, I'll let you answer this, and I'll ask you both my question on this. But same question, myth or fact, luxury dominance will continue?
Well, David makes some good, I was going to go with fact, but David made some good points. I read recently that MasterCard is showing a slight slowdown in luxury goods purchases in the last few months. But then on the other hand, we're seeing companies like Ralph Lauren post a 30% increase in sales over the last 3 months. So I think it's a sector that's poised for growth. Their core customer is resilient. They perhaps aren't being really affected by a recession or inflation. There's definitely their secondary customers, more of the millennial crowd and Gen Zers that maybe would be affected, but I think their core customer is resilient. There's so much innovation taking place in the luxury sector, between all the beautiful products that they keep releasing that I love. And there's so many collaborations taking place, Stella McCartney and Adidas, Gucci and the North Face. There's tons of experience advancements in terms of in-store with personalizations and how they're able to cater their customer. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on in the luxury sector. And, as long as their core customer isn't being affected, I think we're poised for growth. We did see that time period of revenge spending where maybe there was like a pretty high uptick. Maybe that time period's over with, but luxury was on the rise before the pandemic. So maybe we're just slowing down a little bit, but I think it's still on an upward trajectory.
I want to, call out what both of you kind of touched on, which is it's not the correlations between visits to sales are different in luxury than they are in other sectors, because that core shopper can have such a large basket size, is coming with such intent. And we saw this in the early days of the recovery from the pandemic. Even when visits were down, sales could be way up, because the person who is coming and they're coming to spend aggressively. And so I think that is kind of the key element of luxury. And what we're talking about is this, what we found in kind of 2021 was this floor that luxury has, because in rougher periods, it can become accessible to other audiences, whereas its core is always there, but there is an upside that we didn't necessarily, at least some of us didn't necessarily realize was there. And it makes that sector very interesting kind of to track and look at. Interesting. I want to get to this question now before we kind of go further. A question came in, we talked a lot about kind of replacing traditional retail. And so one person asked, like, what are the sectors, or let's say, like, give one key sector each of like a sector that is replacing traditional retail that you feel particularly bullish about. I mean, Alana, maybe we'll start with you, because you would discuss this a little bit.
I am pretty focused on MedTail these days. There's just so much happening in that space, and the needs of that tenant, that type of tenant, varied so drastically from traditional retailers, but it's such a draw to shopping centers. It offers that repeat customer, the dwell times increase, there's cross shopping opportunities. I just think that they're just increasingly becoming an asset for landlords, and so many interesting new concepts that are coming out. There's a brand that we're working with right now. It's a type of med spa that's offering infrared saunas and cold plunge pools, and it's used as an aftercare to fitness. So there's lots of complementary services for fitness. So yeah, just a lot of innovations and interesting concepts coming out in that space.
I watched a really long it's weird to admit this, but a long video today about the values and benefits of like cold plunge pools after a workout. It's a very big, big thing.
I've just been learning about it. It is. I'm on board.
David, same question to you. A non-traditional retail tenant that you feel particularly excited about.
Well, Ethan, first, I think we ought to both go out to Minnesota in January and do the pole plunge.
Yeah, you had me at Minnesota.
Yeah. I don't want to. I would obviously. I mean, MedTails to me is the obvious category to pick. I mean, as Alana has pointed out, there's so many. I think what's beneficial, especially from a landlord perspective, is there's so many different ways you can take the category. I mean, a lot of people hear that and they think, yeah, it's just an urgent care center. I mean, it's not. I mean, you've got all your dental clinics, you've got your med spas. I mean, we're signing deals with, it's not really the same thing, but even like tattoo removal, at some level, you might argue it's, an aesthetic MedTail usage. There's so many other ways that can go. And, to Alana's point, like it changes the dynamics of the dwell time. You're looking at different ways that maybe they don't cross shop one day, but they will come back because, it didn't really fit in with their previous path. But there's so many other ways to think about it in terms of how it benefits the center. But the other obvious one that I would just put out a call for is the sort of the continued strength of the fitness category. And, sort of the final debunking of the myth about how that's going to draw your traffic, use up your parking spaces, or it's going to overlap with other centers. Yes, people don't want to go to grocery shop after going to the gym, but they might not go before, but they'll go somewhere else. They'll go to a different tenant before, and then they'll go to the gym for sure. And we've seen that in our centers as we look through all of our co-tenancy methodology.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really fantastic point. I mean, I also think it's this recognition of eyeballs as a value. We had a MedTail company that was on a webinar. I mean, this must be a year and a half ago now. And he was just explaining one of the big draws was the cost of those eyeballs. He's like, the amount they have to spend online. So if you're a company that also has some sort of product component too, so yes, I have this spa experience, but I'm also pushing kind of this, special ice to make your at-home plunge pool colder, whatever it may be. Like, there are other values just to having that visibility, and it can go a really long way for these companies. Let's go into another sector that has done, at least relative to the rest of its space, much better, and that's QSR. And so, David, I'll kick off with you on this one. Myth or fact, QSR will continue to show strength at the expense of full service restaurants in 2023.
Oh, it's definitively a fact. I mean, I was trying to come up with sort of a quote. Honestly, I think QSR is the grocery sector of the post-COVID world. I mean, I just think there is so much hunger for, and there's so many new players in this field, in addition to just the ones we all think of growing. For every single one that we can name, there are 3 or 4 more that are trying to either getting funding or they're rolling out now. I mean, there's, what was it, a Hawaiian coffee chain? I mean, who knew, but they're out there and they're getting funding and they're getting ready to come to the US mainland. I mean, it's just, astounding from that perspective. But I do think it's QSR, and especially given it's sort of like the perfect storm for them to have macroeconomic conditions, additional, people just sort of maybe shifting out of some of the grocery spending and looking for an alternative, but something that's not expensive, that they don't have to go into a restaurant and deal with other people. There's just this ability for them to have, reasonably healthy food if they can find it for not a ton of money. And, now the real challenge is finding all that space, because again, I'll get back to my point, but without new construction, they're all starting to fight for the same out parcels, and it gets, as a landlord, it's a great position to be in. But, from a tenant perspective, they will be challenged. We've actually also seen some folks not turn down, but are willing to turn down the requirement for a drive-through if it means they can get into a space. And
Oh, that's really interesting.
you know, if it's a market they want to be in and they can't not, there's just no way they can do the drive-through. We are starting to see a little, but it's not a lot, but some are starting to wiggle a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember, like, what was it, a year and a half ago when we were told that centers are just going to be essentially large drive-through lanes and buy online, pick up in store parking lots? And so I mean, maybe not. Alana, same question to you. QSR strength is going to continue in 2033 at the expense of full service restaurants.
Well, I definitely agree with David, and it's certainly a fact. It's interesting because I'm just thinking, as David's talking, I'm thinking consumers want convenience, and then we're talking about the drive-through, but maybe not that much convenience. Maybe they want the balance still, but you know, they might have learned how to cook during the pandemic, but I think, you know, that is, you know, something that as inflation continues and the cost of food continues to go up, they're looking at other options. They want something more convenient. They want something that's easy, inexpensive. And so QSR is it's just a natural choice. They're not dining out maybe as much as they were post-pandemic. And so, you know, we're looking at all these different concepts hit the market. I was just thinking, you know, you have Dutch Brothers on the screen. I'm just thinking of all the different coffee concepts that I've seen come through recently in the last year and a half. And it's incredible. It's just flooding the market. And yet there's still a consumer audience for all of it. So it's interesting to see what new concepts we're going to see next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. We've done a lot of looking at, I think it's just my own obsession with coffee, but we've looked at a lot of these players. And the fascinating thing is, even when you think about like Starbucks, we did, you know, one of our analysts here did an analysis of the markets they said they want to enter, and they're underserved considering what they're doing elsewhere. So they can be everywhere and still have room to grow. And it's pretty tremendous what that space is seeing. You're right. It's like it's a good time to be in the QSR space. You know, yeah, go ahead.
Actually, one thing I just wanted to add in is I also think at some level we're also seeing there seems to be a lot more like positioning for the QSRs that they're doing sort of behind the scenes. I mean, one just has to look at that whole campaign of theirs to say, like, come have your Thanksgiving dinner with us. You know, I mean, if that sort of doesn't spell out their understanding of the role that they're playing now, I mean, I don't know what would.
You know what? It's a great point, and I want to go back because the question came in though, and I think you touched on something really important there. The question is, could the increase in QSR visits be inflation driven? I think the answer is yeah. I mean, obviously there's an impact, but prices are going up at a lot of these places. They're not cheaper; they are more expensive, and obviously everything is relative in a period of inflation. But I think your point is really important. Some of them are taking this role that has classically not been for QSR, which is, you know, come have Thanksgiving dinner with us. We're part of your meals. We're healthier. We're not just your classic perception of fast food. And that evolution is allowing them to take more advantage of good alignment with trends.
Absolutely.
All right, trading down. This is obviously a big topic. And Alana, you mentioned this earlier, so we'll start with you because you're the one who triggered this. Trading down and the search for value will continue to define retail performance in 2023, myth or fact?
I mean, I think, you know, we'll see where the economy goes into 23. I think, you know, we've got all types of speculations for short recession, longer term. But I still think it's a fact. You know, we're definitely seeing, you know, companies like Costco, Dollar General doing really well right now. The middle is getting soft. Consumers are looking to save on items. They're shifting their shopping patterns. They're buying more in bulk when they can, when it makes sense. They're moving to less expensive brands, more private labels. So I think that's probably something that will continue.
David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think what's really interesting is I sort of equate it as I sort of, you know, the thing I sort of think about when I, you know, don't have something immediately critical deadline to fill out, you know, is the American consumer has been told that like they should always have an option, you know. And so what's interesting is that even in this trading down world, what you see is there is even continued specialization within that, whether it's like the pop shelves of the world or like Dick's opening up clearance centers. Not that Dick's was trading down to begin with, that, but you know that they're, you know, even when it would seem to be less or least reasonable for a company to figure out a new chain or a new channel that the American consumer has basically been taught over the last 60 years that they should expect more opportunity. And it doesn't matter what the macroeconomic conditions look like, but that they're going to continue to specialize. So I'm actually mostly interested in seeing once, as this really takes on, more of a lengthy time period for trading down, what else is sort of going to come out of the woodwork? Who else is going to come out and address it? Because it feels like whoever sort of unlocks that has a lot of potential for growth.
You bring up this point. I think there's this weird, not weird, but there is a conflict there, because on the one hand, you have so many rapid expansions in the discount lane, Dollar General, Big Lots, Five Below, you can name several others, and they're growing so fast, and yet you don't see a massive change in visit share, meaning that's like there is so much demand in that space. But at the same time, also, you were seeing some of these discounters, again, not fun. They're not trying to become Nordstrom's or, Neiman Marcus, but they were moving up a little bit. And, Five Below was launching more expensive products. Pop Shelf was an upscale version of Dollar General. So I'm really fascinated to see, and we heard Dollar General is going to be expanding their Pop Shelf concept. So I do think there is a recognition that this is going to be still significant. The discount lane is very, very important and highly lucrative, but this push to diversify away from it is still happening at the same time, which is really fascinating in terms of what these companies believe the future is going to look like, where all of these lanes could potentially be thriving. We only have, all right, I'm going to have, this is like my favorite topic in the world, so I'll have to save it for another time. I want to go, this is not a myth and fact, but look, it's why we get to do these. We'll have to do them again. We'll just do this more regularly. That's all. You guys, you're not busy. It's okay. We can do these all the time. I'll go to each of you with the same question. What is the most important lesson from retail in 2022 to use when creating a strategy for 2023? David, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's sort of, it's surprisingly not different. I think I would sort of say you have to build flexibility into your DNA, or else you won't be able to pass on your DNA. And if you want to survive, it's going to be a require. I mean, it's not that companies don't have it, but just, it has to happen all the time, every day, every hour. Everyone has to be involved in it. It can't just be a top-down approach. Everyone has to figure out how to be flexible, because that's the only way. There's, like, we laugh about the new normal, but we say it because it changes every week. There's something different. So if that's the point, then you just have to learn the flexibility, or else you're just not going to be able to pass that on.
Great point. Alana, your biggest lesson from 2022 for performing better in 2023?
Well, I think kind of piggybacking off of what David said, it's really the diversification of sales channels for retailers and really taking a full omni-channel approach to their strategy. I think post-pandemic, retailers really recognize the value of the physical store network and what it brings to their business. It helps drive growth, creates brand awareness, widens their customer base. So I think we're really going to see brands continue to focus on their store strategy, and not just their store strategy, but how that impacts their total business, surrounding e-commerce. And then, of course, their industrial real estate is going to be shifting to have distribution centers in the right places to continue to enhance and fulfill those sales. And so finding the right mix and the right balance for their omni-channel network.
Yeah, it's so important. It's basically, it's kind of two sides of the same coin with what you're saying. Is on the one hand, it's this flexibility, diversification to enable you to take advantage of more opportunities and to deal with volatile environments, which we've obviously seen for an extended period. But even more, it's that recognition that it allows you more revenue potential. It allows you to accomplish more with your space, to have more value out of that space. I think I do think there is this kind of post-COVID legacy of just a smarter, more sophisticated approach to space that is offering a real change of like what belongs in a space. We don't have to stand by traditional expectations. How is the space used? We don't have to be as limited as we were. And it makes it for a really exciting time. And with that, and first of all, thank you so much, David and Alana, for joining. This was such a pleasure, and I really appreciate you both taking part. Thank you everyone for joining and being here with us today. For everyone who is celebrating, happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the holidays, enjoy your Black Friday, and please sure to kind of stick with us as we do more of these webinars through the end of the year. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you all for being here.